So our hospital had the first diagnosed COVID case in America. It was a guy who came back from China, allegedly. But here's the part that's weird. So the hospital is 2 campuses, and the second campus is just a birthing center and a rehab unit. So allegedly, they housed that guy there. The CMO told me, oh, that's where we have our special negative pressure rooms, which was a bald-faced lie because every ICU room in our hospital is a negative pressure room. Additionally, as a trauma surgeon, because you deal with all the bad cases, particularly in the middle of the night, everyone tells you everything. I spoke to 0 nurses, 0 infectious disease doctors that ever took care of that patient.
Hold on. Do you think that patient actually existed, or did they want everybody to think there was a COVID patient there from Wuhan?
I don't know. I just know I knew everybody and no one met the guy.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Okay. Welcome to the Alix Mayer Show. Today's guest is Dr. James Miller. You might not have heard of him, but he was a doctor working at a hospital in Everett, Washington when we were locked down. You're not going to believe what happened at his hospital. If it sounds absurd that the doctors at his hospital saw a media story about how busy their hospital was, yet there were empty beds and nurses leaving and watching cat videos, you're not going to believe the other absurdities that were happening there. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Also, please share with anybody you think would benefit from this information. The Alix Mayer Show is sponsored by Mish International, gold and silver specialists since 1963. When you need protection from monetary inflation and leveraged assets exposure, you contact the dedicated people at Mish International. Mish International, a family business, offers true expertise, integrity, reliability, and fair pricing of gold and silver. Visit their website at mishinternational.com. That's MISH international.com. Hey folks, I'm here with Del Bigtree on the set of The Highwire.
Hey, good to see you.
And Del, you're coming to Silicon Valley this fall, aren't you?
I am. I think a lot about it. The last fundraiser I did with you, we did like 2 different nights.
I had 5 couples come up to me and say that you saved their marriage.
Oh, good.
I had a PA and a nurse say that you had totally changed their minds, and that creates waves.
Yeah, it really does. If you want to get to a great fundraiser, is doing great work. Free Now Foundation, I love the work that you guys are doing. California can get really testy. You're the most oppressed state in America, but you're actually starting to make some headway. We're seeing some of the original authors of SB 277 wondering if they've made the right decision.
And I have to say, California is the worst state in the country for medical freedom. There's a medical exemption on the books, but it doesn't function. It's designed to fail. So we have no options for children to go to school in California without vaccines. But there is so much hope. Free Now Foundation, we have 2 lawsuits. One of them would totally end the need for exemptions. There's a lot of stuff happening in California, and I think we're going to see a lot of progress over the next year or 2, and things are going to change dramatically.
Well, look, you want to get involved, and I'm going to be speaking at this fundraiser September 12th in Silicon Valley. Free Now Foundation, where do we go to sign up or be a part of that?
Go to freenowfoundation.org and you can sign up for the fundraiser. You can get to meet Del in person, get a picture with him, ask your questions. We always have a robust Q&A. It is going to be a good time. Margaritas, organic tacos, and all of your medical freedom friends.
Absolutely. I'll see you there.
Me too. Dr. James Miller, welcome to the Alix Mayer Show. I am so excited to interview you today about your experience in the hospital in Washington when we were locked down. You've got quite the story.
Thanks for having me on. It's an honor.
So, why don't we start with your background so people get to know who you are as a medical doctor?
Sure. I graduated from Loma Linda University in Southern California in 2000, and I went on to become a surgeon and graduated from UCSF Fresno in 2006. I actually grew up in rural Washington State on the West Coast on an island called San Juan Island, and I moved close to home to one of those local hospitals afterwards. And then over time, evolved my practice in being predominantly trauma and moved to the hospital in Everett, which had the first diagnosed COVID case. I moved there in 2014 and worked there through 2022 and was a trauma surgeon and surgical ICU doctor there.
And you have a history of maybe being a little more ethical than some of your colleagues. Can you tell us about the ethics incident before we got locked down?
And I kind of struggle with that because I don't think my ethics are amazing.
Okay.
I think that my ethics are bare minimum. And it turns out that bare minimum ethics were not tolerated because they were uncomfortable for hospital administration. There's actually quite a system of corruption with the ethical systems up there. And I think it's really endemic throughout America. And this is one of the things that needs to fix for us to move forward and have a healthcare system that people can trust. But one of the issues is just a widespread system of corruption that happens to well-meaning physicians by a system of like grants and subsidies and leadership positions. And so what will happen is a well-meaning physician will be, say, interested in sepsis, and they'll say, hey, you've done great work, let's pay you this extra stipend to review sepsis. And at first it's benign, and at first you're doing reasonable work, and then they'll say, well, we'll pay you a little more, and you realize that some of the things asking you to do aren't quite right, but they're not quite wrong. And then eventually you make a genuine compromise, and eventually you're completely compromised. And so the hospital I was at in Everett, essentially, and I say essentially just because there might be someone out there I didn't know, every leader in a position that could say no to unethical, madness, bad healthcare was compromised. They all had little stipends, they all had little grants, they all had little projects for which they were paid money that by itself isn't big money, but it adds up. And so you make, a couple $1,000s a month doing this project, and then a couple $1,000s a month doing that project, but eventually you've changed your lifestyle. And it's very petty and actually small and shameful. I think the doctors got to that point. But that was one of the big ethical issues. But it went big because I was doing some work with quality review and uncovered an ethical scandal that had to do with Medicare fraud that the chief medical officer of my hospital was involved with a similar medical group that they were trying to bring an affiliation. And I called them and I'm like, hey, you guys need to stop this. And I was told, you need to play ball. And I said no. And then I was basically accused of every wrongdoing a physician can be accused of. All that were unfounded, all which were disproved.
What did it mean that you were told to play ball? What were you being asked to do that you didn't feel comfortable doing?
Turning the other way when fraud led to death.
Ooh.
For instance, and I mean, like I had a meeting with the chief of surgery who sat down with the chief of trauma with me and said, hey, this nurse did wrong, hurt a patient, you complained, you need to cover for her. You need to falsify the medical record to cover for this nurse. And I said no. And they said, but if you don't cover for the nurse, she won't cover for you when you hurt somebody. And so in addition to being accused, and just so you know, when you're accused of like an obvious wrong that you can't have medical staff privileges as a doctor, it takes a lot of time out of your life, probably 40 hours of your time to clear. So, after I reported, right around the time I was reporting the chief medical officer and his crew for 3 counts of just smoking Medicare fraud, I had a dozen complaints against me. They were all unfounded. It all went away, but each of those takes so many hours.
Give us an example of some of the complaints.
They complained of battery. They complained that when they couldn't get any of the medical, they complained like I committed malpractice. They said that I falsified medical records, battery, but none of these things were true.
And prior to you making the ethical complaint, there were no complaints against you ever, right?
The thing is, when you speak up as a trauma surgeon, you're always in contentious cases. So the typical trauma surgeon gets a write-up about once or twice a year. That's just kind of expected because any high-profile case that involves like morbidity, which is person injury or death, you're involved with. So emotions always run hot, and you just have to understand that. And so trauma surgeons are naturally contentious because it's an environment of high emotion, high dollars, high-profile cases. You take care of everyone's worst complications. So like if an interventional radiologist tears out an organ doing a procedure wrong, you're in the middle of that. And so it's just contentious. People's feelings are hurt a lot.
That makes sense.
But like when they couldn't get me on any of those charges, they said I was a racist. And the thing about it is that it was just pure harassment. So you'd be called in front of a board of usually 5, sometimes 12 other physicians or community leaders, and you have to sit there for like an hour and have them make every accusation against you imaginable. And in the end, the truth comes out mostly, because we had electronic medical records, our hospital was highly surveilled. And so all my actions were actually video recorded. And so it all goes away in the wash. The racism charge was hilarious because they couldn't get you on anything. And I even had an email that one of the nurse leaders had said, Dr. Miller is a problem to this hospital. We need to get rid of him, find things. And then the next couple of weeks, I got like 12 write-ups on me. So it was like comedic, but there was no substance to it. It still takes a lot out of your life.
Yeah, it's exhausting and it's time consuming.
But the racism one was funny though, if you don't mind, because you got to find humor in this. And until kind of late 21, mid 21, I actually was just making fun of everybody because I was like, you people are just ridiculous. But in July, August of 21, it became super unfunny for me. But the racism charge was great because they accused me of racism. I got called in, and again, this is a 500-bed hospital, a flagship hospital. I don't know what the medical staff is, but probably like 800 or 1,000 doctors. I'm called in for like no preparation time with the CEO of the hospital, the chief medical officer of the hospital, the chief of surgery, the head legal counsel of the hospital. I'm not allowed representation. I'm not allowed to even see what they have. And they said, you're a racist. You have to sign all these forms saying you're a racist and we won't fire you.
Come on.
I'm like, no, but I said, but I'm not a racist.
That's
absurd. And they're like, you are, we have proof. I said, show me the proof because I'm not a racist. It's not possible because there's nothing in me that's racist. So then they said, okay, we have the proof. And like literally in that meeting, they said, actually, we had the proof, but it got deleted yesterday. You have to agree with us. Just sign the form. And so I'm laughing at them, right? So I'm in this meeting that's supposed to be totally intimidating, and I'm just making fun of them. And I said, by the way, like, who did you think I was racist against anyway? In addition, like, I don't believe you because your mouth's moving, but who was I racist to? And they said, oh, it was the painters. I'm like, well, where are they from? Oh, they're from Guatemala and Colombia. And I was like, you guys are so stupid. I told them, you're so stupid. I'm Guatemalan. I don't wear it on my sleeve, and my last name is Miller, but I'm still Guatemalan, and you guys are just ridiculous. So I got up, didn't sign the forms, because if you sign those forms, you'll never get re-credentialed. You're reportable to the National Provider Data Bank, and you can never really work. And so what would usually happen with most providers who spoke up is some of these charges, something sticks. Eventually if you throw enough dirt at someone, something's going to stick a little bit. And then you're compromised. And then they say, if you don't play along, if you don't turn the other way when there's stench coming down the hall, basically, ethical stench, medical stench, people being hurt, these charges come to light. Like on the racism issue, I'll tell you a story that didn't have to do with me, but it points to how ridiculous it is. There was a young graduate who started, kind of guy who always had his pencil sharpened, hard worker, straight-laced guy. Patient came in with a crushed chest, tension pneumothorax, which is a condition where the pressure in the chest wall pushes the heart over so that you can't get blood back. And so you lose blood to your brain and you die and you go unconscious. So she came in, her vital signs were bad. She went unconscious. He cut her chest, just a little bit, put in a chest tube, decompressed it, her vital signs came back. She was of some ethnic minority, doesn't matter. Someone witnessed and said, he's a racist because he didn't use a local anesthetic. Well, to do a local anesthetic would have cost her brain cells, might have meant she wasn't salvageable, like she died. He went through a month and a half of struggle sessions. And in the end, they're like, okay, you're not a racist. Now destroy the file. And they're like, no, we're keeping this file. This is in his dossier.
And I'm sorry, but who's qualified on the hospital staff to do a sincerity test of whether or not somebody's racist? This is absurd, Dr. Miller.
Oh, it's way worse than that. Yeah, but here's how bad it was. So like during the throes of COVID, when I was speaking up, I got called so for any of your any surgeons in the audience, they'll appreciate how offensive this is. I have a full OR day, right? Totally stacked. They call me and say, and I'm in the middle of a case, and they say, it's an emergency. You need to come down and speak with the chief medical officer of your medical group, who's your employer, who oversaw about 1,000 physicians, and the chief medical officer of the hospital. Right away. This is highest importance. And so I'm doing acute care surgery, so not all these patients can wait, so I have to pause the OR. I finish my case, I pause the OR, I go down, and they're like, I can't swear words, but you're a bad person. And And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm the same person I've always been. I've been working here for like 8 years. Or 7 years at that time. I'm the same person. And like, we have a full dossier on you. And I was like, are you the Stasi? Like, you forget your place. You're supposed to be administering medical staff to provide excellent patient care. Instead, you're acting like the secret police. Like, you guys are just out of your minds. And by this time, I just couldn't help but make fun of them because, and almost when I would open my mouth in front of, particularly my employer, the chief medical officer of my medical group, he would just sweat his pits out. And
Good for
just
you.
like, I would just say, hi, Steve, and just.
How to make the Stasi sweat.
Yeah, total Stasi sweat. So like if you're accused of something, like if say I was accused of falsifying medical records, right, which of course never happened, I would defeat it because like the electronic medical record we had timestamps. So anytime you edit it, it's timestamped, right? Everything was above board. There was physical evidence for everything I'd done. Defeat that accusation, and then they were like, well, it's in your dossier. There's a history. And if I took them seriously, it would have been super intimidating.
Yeah.
So that's the corruption side. But it was pervasive. Again, it was everybody. It was the head of infection control, the head of infectious disease, the sepsis team, and just kind of pick your place. Anywhere there should have been mature doctors who put brakes on things, they were bought. And they were instructed like me, you need to cover for them so they'll cover for you when you make a mistake.
Unbelievable.
And then when you add to that, there was this spirit as COVID marched on of just absolute confusion because the hospital would come up with these inane policies on almost a bi-weekly basis that would have to do with race or gender. And so we had required reading of White Fragility and Ibrahim Kendi's books. I never read them. And we're supposed to the whole trauma surgeon was assigned a re-education camp by a DEI officer because one of our surgeons sounded like she didn't know what this person's pronouns are, but we were supposed to have re-education on anatomy and biology, and so it was preposterous. And after a little while, if you don't have an external loci of reference, your up and down are completely crossed. Your right and left are crossed. You don't even know what you're doing because of this stuff. And then they threw into the confusion these very sinister policies of protocol first. So this is when my hospital started affiliating with the World Economic Forum. They instituted this policy that's called Care and Reliably, which sounds like, oh, that's a really nice policy. We're going to do the right thing for the right person every time. Sounds great. But it's protocol-driven medicine that hurt people. And it hurt people bad. So when they first rolled out the policy, what the policy basically was that anyone in the hospital, no matter their medical training, would have an equal right to ensure the protocols were followed. So me as a senior trauma surgeon and surgical ICU doctor, I could be overruled by a food service worker if I wasn't following the established protocols.
Are you kidding?
So when they rolled that policy, I spoke up in an unkind way publicly in a meeting, and I had to go to administration for my re-education because that is literally insane.
It is.
And so when they started those policies, please interrupt me if I'm talking too much on tangent, but when they started those policies, we instituted those policies for sepsis. Sepsis is one of the leading causes of death in hospital, makes a lot of sense to get protocols that help. So we started the sepsis team. Hospital invests $400,000 on it. We get federal grants. All this kind of stuff seems great. We instituted the policies. A year later, our hospital sepsis mortality went up by 28%.
Are you
So
kidding?
you know what they did? They increased it. They did it more. We instituted more protocols. The last year I was there, 21 to 22, as a result of these policies. So in trauma surgery, you grade your trauma based on something called injury severity scores. Trauma surgeons like to try to grade and score and compete. So the hospitals trauma surgeons are inherently very competitive. Every hospital can publish what their survival rates based on injury severity scores. Our rate doubled, went up by 100% between 21 and 22.
That's insane. And so did they blame this new policy, or did they just think
No.
there was some other factor?
They blame transphobia or
What?
racism or something.
It can't get more absurd.
it was completely absurd.
And this is like
But
a
if
Monty
you
Python episode, but it's real life. It's tragic.
Well, it became unfunny in a hurry. And so I had a couple of key phone calls. So during the COVID thing, like in California where you live and Washington where I used to live, it became illegal to go to church.
Yeah.
I started going to a church that wouldn't close. And the pastor there was a good guy, but it was a very blue collar church, like a storefront Calvary Chapel church, small church. He just didn't care. And also he was a chaplain for the police officers, so they wouldn't arrest him. And so he called me once and he said, hey, we've got this congregant. She's calling me literally every night, telling me the hospital's killing her. He's like, I can't visit the hospital because of the lockdowns. Can you just go and calm her down or do something? And so I went and I said, hey, try not to say her name. She's like one of the best people in the world. She's just awesome. Light years ahead of me in understanding COVID. And, but you know, like late 70s, smoker, cancer survivor, you know, had all the risk factors. And she's sitting there on high flow nasal cannula. And I said, would you like me to consult? So I went through her chart. And she was right. The hospital was trying to kill her. And so being in the position I was, I talked to the key respiratory therapist involved in her care. I was like, don't do this. Do this other thing. Took care of it. She survived. She did great. She was hilarious. But not everyone has a pet surgical ICU doctor to come and save them. Like
Right.
Danielle, she didn't have a pet trauma surgeon. And a reasonable, qualified person could look at that and say, they're trying to kill her. Stop. The thing about it is that it was just so common. It was crazy. Then I had another phone call where this whole story became very unfunny for me. And I was actually visiting one of my kids in Georgia. She just had a baby. And my pastor called me and said, hey, this congregant, he's really upset. I don't understand, but he needs some medicine. And so I called and I actually got his wife because he was too upset. He was a long-haul trucker, if my memory serves me correctly. And he went in to see his doctor to get his diabetes medicine refilled. His doctor said, you're not vaccinated. If you're so smart, figure out how to get your own medicines.
No way.
And he refused to fill them. And he was like, weird. So he went to go urgent care. They refused to treat him. They refused to give him medicines. So he had to go to the ER and they give him a 7-day fill. So he would be on the road for like 2 weeks at a time. So that obviously can't work. And plus you get like a $400 or more ER bill for getting a medicine refill. So I talked to him on the phone. I was like, okay, I think you're a kook. You know, that can't possibly be. But the way you handle things privately in medicine is I wrote a medical record, got all his allergies, called in his medicines. And then I just hung up on him and I called the chief medical officer of the medical group that oversaw the clinic he attended. Because I knew all these people. The thing is when I'm speaking to these people, I knew them personally. I broke bread with most of the people who were the biggest perpetrators. And so like they were, when I'm speaking, I could talk about, I can name names, I can speak specifics. But I called him up and I'm like, Steve, this can't be. This guy must be wrong. I think you guys need to change the messaging of your clinic because patients are obviously under misunderstanding. You know, maybe this guy's just simple. And he's like, oh no, that's the right thing. We need to keep our staff safe. And I was like, and I swore at him a little bit. And I said, you know, you're going to create civil unrest by doing this. Like there's no way that your policy is going to end well. And he was like, no, this is the right thing to do. And again, this is the same chief medical officer who was like posting clips by Jimmy Kimmel advertising, you know, that's the thing about Jimmy Kimmel is people make jokes about it, but my medical group's chief medical officer posted that video to excuse exactly what Jimmy Kimmel made a joke about. It was very unfunny. So I thought about it. My wife and I talked about it, and I called my pastor back shortly thereafter, and I said, is there any way you can get our church a licensed medical clinic, to be a licensed medical clinic? I went, and he said, yeah, give me a couple days. I got my own independent malpractice insurance, and then we opened up a free clinic. That way we kind of didn't have regulations and started treating all patients, no matter their vaccine status.
And this was in 2022?
21.
Okay.
And truly I started seeing people like in August of 21. The clinic officially opened in November. And as soon as it did, like my life just changed. Like it just, once you go down that path, there's just no coming back.
No. Dr. Miller, I know when we got locked down, you were working at Providence Regional Medical Center in Everett, Washington. And what happened there right after we got locked down? And then tell me about when things started to go sideways for you there.
With the lockdown, actually, the insanity started way before the lockdown. First of all, everything in the news was wrong. It was all a lie. So our hospital had the first diagnosed COVID case in America. It was a guy who came back from China, allegedly. It was all a propaganda op.
Given that you think that was a propaganda op, what it makes me think of is the fact that University of Washington is right there. Bill Gates is a big funder of that school. He's a big funder of the health metrics and evaluation group that did all those COVID death predictions for the United States. I mean, do you think that that was all part of that propaganda scheme right there locally?
You know, I could theorize. I can speak to what I saw. The mood was so bad, but it was just ridiculous. So I don't want to hypothesize, kind of off air. I might have my opinions, but what I can testify to was after the first diagnosed COVID case that made all the news, the chief medical officer of the medical group called me down, and we were at odds. We were already at odds about corruption issues. And before COVID came, I actually thought medicine was a meritocracy. Because there were 12 trauma surgeons in my hospital. I was the highest performer, lowest complication rate, did the difficult cases no one would do, mentored the young doctors, right? So I was a high performer. I got zero support whenever there was contention because I was speaking against the fraud. So meritocracy was going away. So I'm in this basically contentious relationship with this guy, and he calls me down and says, "Hey, did you hear about this COVID guy?" And I'm like, "Not really. Whatever, it's not my world. I'm a trauma surgeon." My thought of viruses and vaccines was well under 1% of my brain space ever. I knew enough to get A's on my medical school test, but not something I was naturally interested in.
And by this COVID guy, he was referring to Fauci?
No, the patient who had the first diagnosed COVID
Oh, the
case,
first diagnosed
who
COVID
came from
patient.
Wuhan, China, and showed up allegedly on our hospital doors. But here's the part that's weird. So the reason the hospital has such a cumbersome name of Providence Regional Medical Center Everett is because it's actually 2 campuses. And the second campus is just a birthing center and a rehab unit. So allegedly, they housed that guy there.
Wait. They housed the COVID guy who came from Wuhan in the birthing center?
Well, at least at that campus. Now, the CMO told me, "Oh, that's where we have our special negative pressure rooms," which was a bald-faced lie because every ICU room in our hospital, again, was a beautiful hospital. It's the most beautiful hospital I've seen in my life. It was gorgeous. But every ICU bed was a negative pressure room. And so that's just silly. Additionally, as a trauma surgeon, because you deal with all the bad cases, particularly in the middle of the night, everyone tells you everything. I spoke to 0 nurses, 0 infectious disease doctors that ever took care of that patient. So maybe allegedly one of the infectious disease doctors who I never met or never talked to about it kept his mouth shut, treated this guy, but I never heard about it. So none of the pulmonologists, the lung specialists knew about him. No one talked. So the whole thing was silly, but why would you admit a guy to a hospital campus that has no ICU when you're worried about a deadly pandemic? It's just illogical. So just from that, it was ridiculous. Yeah. And then right before the lockdowns, they announced that anyone caught wearing PPE would be fired. When people were starting to get this fear, they said, "If you're wearing PPE, we will fire you."
Are you kidding?
No. They took, and again, remember I was talking about the brain scrambling, which led to establishing inane protocols. So they took and this is not the only hospital, by the way, this is common throughout all America. But they took all the PPE out of every floor in the hospital. This is a 10-floor hospital. They took all the PPE out, put it down in the operating room where you could see it was behind this wall, and put up these very obtrusive video cameras. It says, "If you touch this PPE, we will fire you."
What was the point of hiding the PPE? This is bizarre. And guarding it with security cameras?
Who knows? The stuff was inane. And that's what I'm saying is that at that time, it was every 2 days, some inane statement would come out. So that actually did cause a lot of fear in people. I can say this, a lot of the staff actually got nervous.
So wait. Let me just sit on this withdrawing of PPE, because later, obviously, it became required. But were they trying to make sure that people didn't scare the patients by wearing that stuff? Like, what was
That
the
was
point?
one of the things discussed. Like that was what they were talking about. Yes.
But then later they wanted to scare the patients, and PPE was then required.
Correct.
Okay. So you've got
Yeah.
this first COVID case, and he's supposedly in a negative air pressure room, which is ridiculous because every ICU has negative air pressure. So it wasn't really a special place for this person who came from Wuhan. And so
Right.
what?
With no pulmonologist, talked about seeing him, and I knew all the pulmonologists well.
Really? So they sent no pulmonologist to talk to a guy with COVID and probably had COVID pneumonia. And back then they were diagnosing it based on that chest x-ray that showed this quote unquote glass lung syndrome, right?
Right.
So it would
And
have been a pulmonary pulmonologist who would have gone there.
Yeah, and again, people talk. So I'll just absolutely hold out. There's a theoretical chance this actually happened. It just never happened with any other infectious disease. Like every tuberculosis patient came to the ICU because they were negative pressure rooms. Every other infectious disease we're worried about came to the ICU. So that it's just not logical. And again, as a trauma surgeon, people tell you things.
Yeah.
They just do. And you become a confessor to a lot of people, and they tell you stuff.
Hold on. I've got a weird question. Do you think that patient actually existed, or do they want everybody to think there was a COVID patient there from Wuhan?
Okay, you're asking me to conjecture about things
I
that
know.
might strain my credibility. I don't know. I just know I knew everybody, and no one met the guy.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Okay.
So that was bizarre. And another thing, part of the propaganda is, so the CMO called me down and said, oh yeah, we've got this guy. We put him in this negative pressure room over at, like, again, the campus has the birthing center that we've never heard of housing an infectious disease person at before. He's in all the news. He's in national news, blah, blah, blah. And then the CDC sent us this amazing medicine. And I don't remember the name, but I'm guessing it was remdesivir. And it broke his fever just like that. It was amazing.
Oh, wow. Just like that.
Right, and the thing is like I was pretty loud-mouthed, and so I talked, and so I'm pretty sure like the CMO was just basically calling people who were influential in the hospital and having them become believers. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Oh, completely. Yeah. So it was all a ruse. Like you got this miracle medicine. It worked instantly on this patient that maybe nobody even saw.
Again, I'm just at the very beginnings of mocking everything at this point. And then when they pulled the mask, I'm really making fun of people.
They pulled the masks, like they put those behind the cameras with the PPE?
Yeah, they pulled every mask from everywhere in the hospital. And so as a surgeon, you're supposed to wear a mask in the operating room. And people ask about that. The only reason we wear masks is so you don't get blood in your face. It doesn't actually cut down on infections.
Oh.
And it obviously never helps with the virus. But we all knew that. That was proven science in like 1920.
Okay.
With great, and so like this whole thing about masks to save lives is just preposterous.
And it's not even to protect your patient from like droplets that you might cough or sneeze onto them, or maybe you have a junior mint that will get caught in the mask.
Yeah, it'll keep the junior mints. So it'll definitely keep the junior mints. I think it probably, like if you hork a loogie or you cough like grossly, I think it'll probably prevent the patient from getting that from you. Mm-hmm. But in the OR, there's been no proven benefit. We just do it because it's just kind of standard practice. The OSHA made it standard in America, but with no data. There's a lot of countries where they don't wear masks in the OR and they don't have any increased risk of infection. Okay,
so I think this is going to be news to a lot of our viewers about why surgeons actually wear masks in the OR, and it's so they don't get blood splashed in their face and everybty knows it.
Yeah, it's honestly just the taste.
Okay. Oh gosh, that's gross.
So,
okay.
It's aesthetics, and people will argue with this. Like somebody reads like that's not true. This blah blah. It really is true. You just have to delve into it, and you realize the mask it's a convention that's popular in America and England. They may have changed, since I kind of punched out in 22. But British doctors it's like you can wear the mask, but it's just not standard. And so if you're ever watching surgical videos, you'll see people doing open aortas or bowel resections or breast resections, not wearing masks. And you're like, Americans are like, no, that can't be. The mask doesn't cut down infection rate. That's not so.
That is very empowering to those of us who said masks did not work when we were locked down. Okay, so they sequestered the masks in addition to the other PPE. And so we're getting more and more into absurdistan here. So what happened next, Dr. Miller?
And then they changed their mind and masks became mandatory. It was about maybe a 7-10 day window between that. So it's like all this fury and outrage and then the inverse. And my hospital actually hit its peak and inflection point. So we actually came down, and I remember the day because I was working. You could feel all of a sudden our COVID cases came down March 17th before the lockdowns. And then we locked down. And they may have reinstituted the mask after that. So it's like we went through all this time of fear. We held the line. We took care of patients. It was no big deal. We didn't have a crazy mortality. That was all propaganda. And then they instituted the lockdowns. And I think our hospital experience probably from that point on wasn't radically different than others. But like one data point that just points to how ridiculous and the effects of scrambling people's brains and creating this attitude of fear, because there's just fear was just rampant. And from the outset, I personally, I realized that after we moved to Florida in 22, I was never afraid of the virus, but I was afraid of the hospital and the public health reaction to it.
Yeah.
And just so, as soon as COVID was announced, I'm like, oh dear, we're going to have a social problem. And it was way worse than I ever imagined. But like an example, in July of 20, I was working, and for an ICU to be profitable, and I'm sorry to be like very matter of fact about it, but medicine is a business, and for the ICU to be profitable, you have to have about 85% census in the ICU. We were running about 25-30%, whereas all the and we got inundated with the ventilators, which all they did, like our hospital was big and had a lot of storage. All of our storage units were overflowed with ventilators. They're in the hallway. You couldn't push patients down the patient hallway because there were so many ventilators clogged up. I mean, it was just, so you're dealing with these layers of insanity. It's like, how did I slip into a Vonnegut novel? Like, what the heck is going on to me?
And I'm sorry, but where did all those ventilators come from? Was there some gigantic ventilator inventory that we weren't aware of?
Don't you remember all that fear mongering, and like car plants were repurposed into generating ventilators, and they emptied the national stockpile of ventilators on key hospitals. My hospital was one of them. And all they did is clog up the hallway. It was ridiculous. Okay, but to add to that ridiculous, and also this is a really sad case. So I was in the ICU. It was like 11 a.m. I'd already read like every piece of medical literature reported my specialty. I'd already probably watched a movie. I had, the ICU was basically empty. We were down about 20%, 25%, 30% census. We're low censoring nurses left, right, and center. Low census means if you don't have enough patients, the nurses go home. I was sitting at the charge nurse station, had my feet up, drinking a cup of coffee, and the newspaper was delivered. And one of the administrator doctors, so he was part-time administrator, part-time doctor, but one of the heads of one of the ICUs was by, hey, how you doing? We're chatting. They drop off the newspaper, and the front page, it's a county newspaper. We're the only hospital in the county, Snohomish County. The front page says, local hospital ICU overwhelmed. Health officials not sure what to do. So again, feet up. I've already read the internet for the day. I've seen all my patients. They're all fine. The nurses are being sent home. And this administrator surgeon panics and says, what are we going to do? We're overwhelmed. And I'm like, hey, look at the empty bed. Look at the empty bed. Look at the empty bed. Every bed from my vantage point was empty. There were a few patients in the ICU, but it was basically empty.
So is this just the power of suggestion because the media came out with the story, or there's something else going on, right?
But that's what I'm trying to say to explain the madness. So if you can convince someone who was like from the Ivy League, who had been, high profile person, well published, thoughtful, to believe the newspaper rather than something that's 10 feet from his fingers. And like while he's panicking, literally 2 nurses are going home saying, what are you going to do with your day off? Oh, I think I'm going to go to yoga. What are you going to do? And he's panicking. Again, pit sweat out. I need to call him in. We have to have an action plan. We have to call in. And so the effects of the corruption, the effects of the brain scrambling, the effects of people being taught to follow protocols rather than their own eyeballs and their own experience crippled us.
Absolutely. I mean, if people like that could be cowed by a media article when all the evidence is right in front of them with the empty beds, as you said, and the nurses going home, I mean, there's no hope at this point.
But I mean, you could reach out your hand and touch an empty bed.
Yeah.
So I mean, it wasn't like theoretically you had to go look for it. It was right there.
We know so many of our listeners understand the relationship between health freedom and our personal and economic freedoms. It's the same principle. If you're one of our audience who's concerned about inflation, paper asset crises, and ongoing monetary crises, you may have already started accumulating gold and silver or are considering doing so. There's no gold dealer we know who's better positioned to serve the freedom community than Mish International in Menlo Park, California. I'm one of the many happy customers who's purchased gold or silver in their showroom, or I've had it delivered through their secure courier service. They are true veterans who are honest, fair, and reliable, and so knowledgeable regarding all the choices of gold and silver bars and coins to help you choose the products that fit your goals and your worldview. The principal, Robert Mish, is world-renowned for his expertise in rare coins as well. Write down this number, 650-324-9110. That's 650-324-9110. And visit mishinternational.com. That's MISH international.com to learn more about this notable company. Do you ever wonder what my foundation, Free Now Foundation, really does? It turns out that after all the articles and videos that I do, that a lot of people still wonder what we really do. We're California's leading medical freedom nonprofit, but did you know we're the only group in California trying to end the medical mandates so children can go to school safely in California? And what does that mean? People don't get this, but it means there's no need for an exemption if there's no mandate. We won't need a religious exemption. We won't need a medical exemption. We won't need any type of exemptions anymore because parents will just be able to say no. No is a complete sentence. And Free Now Foundation is going to stay in the courts and do this legal strategy, pursue it as long as it takes until parents call the shots again in California and beyond, and parents can just say a simple no. So if you share this vision of a world where we don't have medical mandates, where children do not need an exemption of any sort to go to school, and this work calls to you, please consider supporting us at Free Now Foundation, freenowfoundation.org. That's spelled FREENOW foundation.org, and make a donation today. Didn't you also say that you talked to an administrator who had admitted to talking to the paper?
Oh, yeah, that was 100% a part of it. It gets way worse than that. The head of infectious disease at our hospital was working with the governor to get people's driver's license taken away who didn't have a COVID vaccine.
Really?
He was on the news all the time.
Wait, talk more about that. What was that going to be? That was going to be like a vaccine passport so you could drive?
Correct. He stopped me in the hallway. He's like, got great news. His name's George. He was all over CNN at the time. Of course he was talking to the newspapers. He was talking to the newspapers. He was talking to the media. He was highlighted everywhere. He's a horrible doctor, by the way. He's like one of the worst diagnosticians on the planet. If you ever were dealing with a contentious case about infectious disease, like whatever he said, you knew that wasn't it. But regardless, he was promoted to the head of infectious disease because that was the era. And
yeah, it's called failing up, right?
Well, no, you get someone who's morally flexible. And my hospital was picked because in leadership we had moral flexibility, like we had a hedge on the market. And that's why I think our hospital rolled out the first COVID case diagnosis.
Okay, wait, you're cracking me up. So morally flexible is a euphemism for unethical?
No, they'll do anything you want.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
There's not like morality isn't a thing. Calling them unethical would imply they knew ethics. Like they're anything. I mean, it's like, it's the moral profile of an assassin. It's a moral profile of they're ambivalent. It's not that they're anti-ethical. It's just, that's not the question.
Wow. So how far do you think this went with trying to make a COVID shot required to be a licensed driver? How far did they get on that?
He was working with the governor.
So do you think they were going to introduce a bill or an executive order?
I think they wanted to. I mean, they had instituted the quarantine camps. I don't know if you had those in California, but they had them in Washington, where they took public places, put barbed wire around them, and were quarantining the unvaccinated homeless. They had a separate line item budget. You can look this up for the strike force to police it, but there was a little too much outrage. That one didn't fly, nor did taking away people's driver's license for being unvaccinated, but they were trying.
So it was public outrage that killed that driver's license requirement? would you say?
I honestly didn't engage more than that. When it was an elevator conversation. George talked to me about it, and I was like, and I said unkind things to him about it, and I said, George, you are going to create a civil war, and he looked at me with these like psycho eyes, like, and so these are our leaders. He knew fully well that was going to foment societal unrest, and he was all in and working with the governor. So those were our leaders.
Unbelievable. Okay, now I'm going to fast forward you to something else I know about your experience during this time at your hospital. And you wrote a lot about how they were treating the vaccinated differently from the unvaccinated in the hospital.
Yes, and again, thanks for doing this interview. So I wrote about my story in 22. A Midwestern doctor published part of it in 23, and that got me an interview on Fox News. And of all the things I talked about, that was the thing that people were ready to hear. I think now they're ready to hear a lot more. So absolutely, the vaccinated and unvaccinated were treated differently. As I was telling you before, they started just denying basic health services to unvaccinated people, which spurned like not giving diabetes medicine. You can't go see your family doctor. Now, you could still get emergency care in the ER, but 100% you were treated differently. You were treated as, a dirty, plague rat. And this was common in social media, but it was no different in the hospital. I mean, the medical community is no different.
I'm actually still shocked right now to hear that, because I thought the vaccinated and unvaccinated people were treated differently in the hospital in regards to COVID. But what you're saying is different. You're saying that for all medical treatment, the unvaccinated people were being shunned.
Yes, I think part of why this is such a good time to talk about this is I think the Overton window has shifted on the discussion. And I think all people have realized the medical care system did not meet their expectations during COVID. I think most people thought before COVID, when you go to the doctor, they're going to help you out a bit, and you're going to get better, and they're going to wish you well. I think most people thought, when I'm really sick, I'm going to go to the hospital, and they're going to help me out a lot and do their best and get me well. After COVID, most people realized their doctors were there for themselves. Their doctors were more than happy to give them a toxic substance that would hurt them, like the COVID injection. And I think most people came to see that the hospitals were really killing fields. And that shift has been pretty dramatic. I felt that shift in 22 when I was still working as a trauma surgeon. Just this morning I was running with a friend, and I was telling him that I was going to be on your show, and that I was going to talk about how the hospitals became killing fields. Like, oh, that totally happened to a friend of mine. And like, we've been really good friends since I moved to Florida, and we're running buddies. And he hadn't thought to talk about his friend who went to the hospital with actually no medical problems. He just needed his oxygen tank refilled. He had COPD that was chronic, but he just went to the hospital because his medical supply company was out of oxygen tanks, and they said you can go to the hospital. So he went to the hospital to get an oxygen tank, and they said, why don't you wait in the ER while we get you your oxygen tanks? Feeling fine. They gave him a shot of something for who knows what. All of a sudden he's in the ICU the next day, dead the next. And
no way.
My friend, who's a local pastor, is like, oh yeah, that's what the hospitals were. It was common, but the basic health services were refused to the people in Snohomish County, and it was systemic. And I confirmed it with the chief medical officer that it was policy, and it was, and that's why I opened our free clinic. And this was a time of just heightened anxiety in the fall of 21, and people were just panicking. And so what our free clinic did, shout out to the pastor, Billy Wheeler, great guy, really gave his heart to the community. The rules were no masks, everyone got a hug, and they got a prayer. And then I would provide health care. Nothing fancy. It got really sticky for me because I thought I could just do like an afternoon a week to keep up with everyone in the church, but they all had friends. And just the idea that people could be treated with a tiny bit of dignity. And it was really heartbreaking, because what ended up happening is I would do a shift like from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And eventually I just gave up doing it at the church. I mean, I would still do the church, but I just gave people my address, and I have cars lined up in my driveway, in front of my house,
really?
Just waiting to be seen. And again, it wasn't like I was doing anything exotic. The part that got a little weird with it is, getting people ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. And we knew because, we were not the forefront, so I was never a big thinker on this, but, saw the experience. And so I started using hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. We sourced it from alternate pharmacies, either different countries or compounding pharmacies. But I got reported to the state by a pharmacist. What's funny about it is what the state was doing is they went through the FLCC list of recommended medicines. And if you prescribed any of that, you got reported to the state. So like if you prescribe budesonide inhaler, they might be one of those conspiracy theorists. I prescribed it was a patient I had treated for some pretty significant COVID problem and some brain fog, and mostly with like ivermectin, but she got that from, an alternate source, never got reported. I prescribed her a low dose of an SSRI for 2 weeks of fluvoxamine, and because that was on the list, I got reported to the state as possibly being in trouble.
That's insane, but we know why it was happening because they had to get the EUA approval for the COVID shots, and if there were any adequate, available, and approved alternative, I call it the 4As, they couldn't have gotten the EUA for the COVID shots.
Sure, but I'm just saying how ridiculous it was.
And it was.
Whereas you get prescribed, it's like the lowest possible dose of fluvoxamine for 2 weeks. That was the tell, is I didn't write it for 6 months.
Right. Unbelievable.
And so you get reported. Now, nothing came of it, right? It was ridiculous, but that was a trigger for my wife that it was time to go, to leave the state.
Okay.
The trigger for me was that I was getting bitter. And I was having a really hard time not having contempt. And that's not the place I want to live. Just because everyone else broke their oaths, because everyone else was a coward. I was close with these people. And it wasn't just in medicine, it was everywhere. In the Bible, it talks about, you'll know the end times when everyone's love grows cold. Everyone's love was cold, and I was getting angry about it. And I didn't want to live in a place of contempt. And it was hard because like an ER doctor would call me after I knew he neglected an unvaccinated person and they died as a result of his neglect, and say, hey, can you help me out of this jam? And it was very difficult for me to be civil, and it was very difficult for me just to be in that environment and not think bad thoughts.
When they wanted you to help them out of the jam because an unvaccinated patient died under their care, what were they asking you to do? Did they want you to falsify records or?
Well, those are two kind of unrelated things. As a trauma surgeon, you take care of everyone's mess-ups. And so, like if an ER doctor puts a line in the wrong place, it becomes your problem. And if ER doctor misses a diagnosis, patient gets sick and doesn't know what's going on, it's your problem. And so that's just the standard. That's just how the relationship goes. You're always, as a trauma surgeon, your people sort of bail out when things go bad. And I was struggling because I knew what they had done. So the hospital had tried hard, and all through this time, by the way, I got all kinds of write-ups against me. I had to defend myself against the community board for stuff that wasn't founded. But after I did the clinic, it got bizarre. So in California, you have microaggressions.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
In Washington, we had microaggressions. So they couldn't get me on any medical malpractice, and they couldn't get me on breaking ethical rules, try as they might. And they tried so hard. They got me on a microaggression.
Which was what?
Well, so for your viewers who don't perhaps live in a state where they have microaggressions, Florida doesn't really have microaggressions. It would run like this. As we're talking, I'm seeing that smile on your face. That intimidates me. That makes me feel vulnerable.
Oh, geez.
That's a microaggression. That creates hostility in me. You need to be fired. That's how a microaggression goes.
Unbelievable.
And so the obviously there's no defense against a microaggression because it's not there. And so the case that came down for me, and this is where I have to be very specific on the language, so if it sounds pedantic, just bear with me because there's a lot of legal ramifications. After I started the COVID clinic, people were extremely displeased on the higher-ups. Like they honestly didn't know what to do with me. So they actually hired an administrator nurse to work in the OR. And I had a patient who had a small bowel volvulus, otherwise totally viable person, meaning he could live if we took him to the OR. And he was developing, typically in a hospital like ours, someone like that should be in the OR within 2 hours of diagnosis. He'd been waiting 8 hours. I went down to the OR to see what was going on. And by law, we were supposed to have 2 ORs running concurrently, 24 hours a day, just because of our trauma designation to handle anything emergent. And both teams that were sitting there watching cat videos. And the rooms weren't open. I said, hey, we need to do this case. This patient's been waiting an unacceptable time. And the charge nurse started throwing out DEI, stuff. And I said, look, it doesn't matter. You actually have an obligation. You're being paid. You also have an oath to be a human being. Bring this patient down. She's like, well, that, hurts my feelings. I'm like, why don't you talk to him about his peritonitis? Just you go talk to him about his peritonitis and we'll watch him go into sepsis. Or you could just bring him to the OR.
And I remember that you wrote that this turned into like these little high school squabbles, which is what this sounds like.
Oh, it was way worse than that. So then they said that my microaggressions created toxic. So by the way, we took him down to the OR. My surgery was 30 minutes. He actually didn't have dead bowel. We caught it in time, lived a nice life, never knew what happened. But they used that as that I was creating a hostile work environment. And so and this is how they just scramble your brain and create fear. I got a courier letter, like I had to sign like a legal courier, and it said you're summarily suspended or something. I think it was summarily suspended. If you set foot on hospital grounds, we'll have you arrested. And I had a bunch of personal property in the hospital in my office. And the thing is when you suspend someone in the hospital, you have to give them a fair hearing. So through all of my write-ups, I asked for fair hearings all the time. Like when I was accused of racism and had to meet with all these administrators, I was like, can I have representation? Can I have an attorney? Can I at least have an advocate? Can I have an ombudsman? They refused every time, and it's a violation of medical bylaws. Part of it is I used to be a medical staff leader. When I first finished training, I ended up becoming a trauma medical director. So I knew the game. And I was on credentials in another hospital. So I knew how this works. And I was like, I want a fair hearing. They refused me in writing 4 times a fair hearing. So if you suspend someone, that person can actually never really practice again because you get reported to the National Provider Data Bank. So they said suspended, which means I get a fair hearing to counter that. They never allowed me a fair hearing. So when I hired a whistleblower attorney and said, hey, this is going to be a big lawsuit because you just wrecked someone in the prime of their career's career, 8 figures at least, it's going to be awesome. All of a sudden, oh, that was a typo. It was a typo signed by the CEO of the hospital, but it was still a typo.
What part of it was a typo, Dr. Miller?
That's, again, you're talking about this ridiculous world. So I had to endure uncountable hearings. I had 2 concurrent investigations by independent investigators to see if my microaggressions were toxic. And obviously it went away. I was reinstated because there's nothing there. And so I was never suspended, even though I was threatened by being arrested. My whole trauma team was told if you return a call, text, or email from Dr. Miller, you'll be fired. So all of my colleagues, people I had mentored, were told they couldn't affiliate with me. And part of what's really funny is once I realized I was developing contempt, I actually resigned. But the hospital administrators didn't get that memo. So it's like they sprung this trap after I had already resigned. And my boss, the trauma director at that hospital, is a good guy. And he said, hey, I resigned in January. He said, can you do me a favor and stay till July, the end of July, to help orient the new grads? Because a lot of them really don't know, haven't had experience to operate. Can you just stick around a little longer? Because I was planning on leaving March or something.
Do you think that was sincere, or do you think that was to set you up for more microaggression accusations or something else?
Oh, no, that came later. No, my boss, my immediate boss actually wanted me to stay and asked me to delay. So I resigned.
That was sincere.
Before this. Yeah, so if I would have resigned after the microaggression thing, I would have lost my license. So there's all these ways that you can break the law without meaning to. So I resigned before it, but the administrators didn't know it. So they sprung this trap on me with all these ridiculous allegations of microaggression, not suspended me once I hired a whistleblower attorney. And then I was sitting around at home for 30 days, and that's when I learned that my hospital was actually an affiliate with the World Economic Forum. I'd never heard of them before. That's when I learned that my hospital was affiliated with an organization that plans to depopulate the planet. I was like, oh my gosh, now I know why they didn't care that I had the best trauma numbers. I was the most efficient surgeon. I had low complication rates. They didn't care because that's not what they wanted. They wanted an incompetent person who would follow orders, and that just wasn't me.
Unbelievable. Wait, so they're affiliated with the World Economic Forum, so that's where they needed to meet their ESG goals, right? Environmental, government, social and government goals, and that's why they were doing the microaggression stuff and all that training. because they wanted a good score from the WEF, right?
One could surmise. Honestly, outside my universe, I'm just a caregiver. Like realistically, I actually like taking care of people. And that's one of the great things about this. I realized for all of this nonsense, I love taking care of people. I'd like to talk about that more because of what I've gotten into now. So it's wonderful.
Yeah.
But the suspensions were fascinating suspensions, not suspensions when you're saying, really, can I please have a fair hearing? Oh, you were never suspended. My bad. I had actually already had a job lined up in Florida as a surgeon, and was planning to move, but my boss asked me to kick it back to like July, I forget, beginning into July. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. I'll help. I'm a citizen. No big deal. I'm not in any rush. And so when they suspended me, I'm like, my first hearing with it, I said, if I'm this really bad person, but I've been here for 8 years, why do you care? I've already resigned. Like, it won't be your problem for long. And they were like, you resigned? What? I'm like, yeah, I did it in writing, like before you guys ever sprung this trap on me. So it's ridiculous. And literally during one of those struggle sessions, because they were just struggle sessions, like I said, you'd be sitting during this time, it was usually 10 against 1, sometimes 12 against 1, like other physicians. And again, all very morally flexible people, which interesting, one of them who's a real not good person is one of the heads of bioethics now at the University of Washington, just as a little prelude.
Very interesting.
Again, I can give names. The attestation I did with the Midwestern doctor has that guy there. But he said to me literally on a recorded conversation, you're not seeming very humble about this. If you just bent a knee, it would go away.
No way. That
was
was a trap.
Yeah, I'd bend a knee if I was wrong.
Right.
But if I'm right, like, go pound it. So I couldn't take it seriously. So I never bent a knee. And in the end, they said, okay, you can come. I got a call. Actually, first from the trauma director, who he's a pretty good guy. I would like him a lot. Think highly of him. Still stay in touch. He had to leave the hospital too later. Another story, but because he still had some ethics, and that just didn't work.
That's such a sad commentary on hospitals and medical doctors.
Oh yeah. And again, I obviously am accusing everyone else.
Right.
And that's a very tough place to be, and I don't say it lightly. I'm actually can stand behind that, and it's sad. And a bunch of the people actually talked to me on my way out saying, I agree with what you did. You're right. I just don't have the courage. I could not endure what you've endured. Mm. But like, how do you want to live that way? How do you look at yourself when you're like, oh, I intentionally did the wrong thing so I could keep my comfortable salary? Like, wow. And those were the best people. The worst people were a lot worse than that. But anyway, I ended up talking to the chief medical officer. Said, so you've been reinstated. We've decided the charges against you aren't there. You need to be back at work in 3 days. And I said, love to be back at work in 3 days. Here's the problem. So as a trauma surgeon, you work hand in hand with each other. Like, we're operating on the same people. You do sign out, you do 12-hour shifts. So you'll be in the middle of operating. You'll tag out to your friend. One of the people will be operating on a critically ill patient. You'll take it to your other friend who takes care of him in the ICU. I mean, you have to be close. Communication is one of the most important parts. And I said, but you just banned all these people from talking to them. You got them all to believe I'm this threat to humanity because I instituted a toxic work environment because of my microaggressions. Again, they couldn't even define the microaggressions, just they had hurty feelings after talking to me. And admittedly, I said, stop watching cat videos. So I guess that's bad, but it's still true. It's just factually true, and I'm not going to back away from that. I never did. I never bent the knee, as it were. So I said, no problem, happy to be back at work in 3 days. We need a mediator because we need someone to work this out. We need to get over this lump that you have created that no one on my team can trust me. And that was when the chief medical officer finally swore at me and said, we'll just pay out the rest of your contracts. They paid me for like 5 months, so they didn't have to deal with me.
Okay, so you had to set up shop again in Florida as a medical doctor, but this time all that surgical training is not what's supporting what you do right now. Now, tell us about your medical practice.
Well, my medical practice is honestly the best, but I usually introduce myself as like a health influencer that has a degree because like it's hard to be called a doctor right now. It's embarrassing after what so many doctors did. When I first moved down, I was actually pretty angry, and I gave myself a little time out, and I planted an organic farm. And we bought a little bit of land in South Florida, just outside of Fort Lauderdale, and we've set up a subsistence farm that supports me and my family. We grow most of our own food.
That's amazing.
And then there was a hurricane that came through, and I was just really frustrated because I was so sad to see what I thought was a noble profession. All the institutions betrayed me. Like the American Medical Association, they were always eugenicists. I never wanted to be a member once I learned what they were. But the American College of Surgeons, I believed in them. I wrote them a letter saying I didn't want my name affiliated with them after how they handled both COVID and the transgender questions. What they did was just unethical. And so I put myself on a little timeout. I planted a farm. I was actually kind of planning on retiring, but then there was a little hurricane that came through, and it caused quite a lot of damage on the West Coast, and I volunteered and did some stuff in the hurricane shelters. I was like, I actually really like being a healer. I actually don't miss operating at all. Not that I had a bad outcome with it. I just it was a phase of my life that was great. It's fun to be really good at something technical, but down deep, I'm more a healer than I'm a surgeon. And so I first got a job with a company that's not U.S. based, and I think they didn't really understand my story, and because they don't really speak English, and I had a great time for a couple of years, but then they brought AI in to help direct medical decision making in the primary care clinic. Ooh. So I was just working as a family doctor. And so when I was in the meeting, I had my computer with me, and they were announcing that AI was going to become mandatory for us to continue providing healthcare. I applied for a new job, and it's with a concierge practice. And so now what I do is it's a very small volume practice. We go to people's houses. We just do kind of in-depth, more holistic care. I honestly spend most of my time getting my patients off medicines. But it's really just optimizing them for their goals. I see all ages, and so it's really fun. Like my youngest patient, I think he just turned 6 months. My oldest patient's 103, and 103 years, not months. And it's great. I mean, my patients are the nicest people in the world, and they're happy, and it's just life-giving. And it's, I could do this the rest of my life. It's just fun. It's not stressful.
So through all that trauma, you found your true life's calling, it sounds like.
I think I had my calling before. I mean, I think God gives you grace to thrive, and this is great right now.
I didn't realize that the natural health laws were so different in Florida compared to Washington.
Try helping someone with chlorine dioxide in Washington State and see how long you make it.
Oh, I get it. Yeah, I've I've been using it since 2015.
Try talking about treating lupus with DMSO, or try doing high-dose ivermectin for someone with lung cancer and see how long you make it. Here they'll just do the politeness, and the big box pharmacies won't fill it. Washington, California, that's a completely different thing.
Okay, yeah, that explains a lot. I'm also in that side of medicine because 30 years ago I was brain damaged and completely disabled by vaccination. So I've had to crawl back, and all the conventional stuff was of no use at all. And the only thing that's gotten me better is the type of medicine you're practicing now.
Yeah, no, I take care of a lot of people's autoimmune problems, and it's super gratifying. I see people that had hit a low nadir despite being on all the medicines, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, we can go ahead and get you off those and go ahead and do these other things and get you back to a quality of life that's reasonable.
And then they thrive, right?
Often.
So, Dr. Miller, what happened when they instituted the vaccine policy at your hospital?
This was hilarious. So I say with shame, before this all happened, I didn't think about vaccines. And in late 20, we got the vaccines in the ICU. Pretty sure my first one was saline. Second one, my body rejected. I just had a weeping sore. But one of my close friends at the time, was afraid of the vaccine for a variety of reasons. For one, her boyfriend was on a vent for a week after his last flu shot because he got Guillain-Barré syndrome, but she didn't want to get the vaccine, which was reasonable. God bless her for that. And they were going to fire her. And she wasn't outspoken. She was outspoken in the OR, a good surgeon, but not outspoken. And she came to me in tears, like, I can't lose my job, like some bills to pay, what have you. And one of my children was a law student at that time. And so I called her up. I'm like, I can't find any good vaccine exemptions. Can you help? So she went and delved into the Civil Rights Act and wrote a banger of a vaccine exemption. And if anyone needs a vaccine exemption, I can share this. It works. So, like, it worked with the Navy even. One of my friends was in the Navy and they were going to kick him out, and we gave him the vaccine exemption. He just customized it for his situation and he got a vaccine exemption, no questions asked. My wife was a nurse practitioner student at Georgetown, and Georgetown University, which does, I mean, it's like so as pro-vax as you come.
Remarkable. Dr. Miller, what a pleasure to talk to you. This has been an incredible conversation.
Yeah, nice talking to you.
I think people are going to laugh and they're going to cry mostly, but this was absolutely completely revealing about what went on behind the scenes at your hospital and probably many other hospitals across the United States. So I really thank you for your honesty and the great detail in which you told these stories of what happened.
Great, thanks very much.
We are so happy to have as our prime sponsor, Mish International, Northern California's acclaimed specialists in rare coins and gold and silver investments. Our friend and supporter, Robert Mish, is the same principal that started the company back in 1963, and he's still there every day with 63 years of experience. He has integrity, reliability, and fair pricing, whether you're buying or selling. When you have business to do with precious metals, you'll always be treated well at Mish International. Call 650-324-9110 and tell Robert that Alex sent you.